Welcome to Cowboys and Gangsters, Grit and Grace episode with Josh, the lead pastor at Grace Point Fellowship and here in Medford. What an honor it is to be with him in this season of transition. How long have you been with Grace Point in this season?
Yeah, I've been at Grace Point now for, 2 years, in December.
Yes.
So almost 2 years now we've been here
So good.
serving the Rogue Valley.
That's good. You've been in the ministry a long time. I just want people to kind of get to know who you are on this episode, and then hopefully in the future you're on here much more. We're talking about all the intrinsic issues of our culture, or what maybe even as a new guy to the Rogue Valley, some of the stuff that you see uniquely to the valley that are challenges and hurdles before you're too comfortable here and you forget all those things. So
I started in ministry as a 12-year-old boy. I saw somebody was in kids ministry, said, hey, why don't you come serve after you graduate?
Yeah.
So I got to plug in at an early age, started serving as a 12-year-old, helping out in kids ministry, which turned into a couple years later as a 14-year-old teaching in kids ministry at then by 16 was in charge of Sunday mornings when our kids pastor was gone for the weekend.
Wow.
And I look back on that and I'm like, there's no way today that I would hand the reins of our children's ministry over to a 16-year-old kid. And yet God just had favor in my life, and I'm grateful for it.
They had greater faith than we do.
Oh, for sure.
Than we have in others.
For sure. And so, that was it was foundational. It was formational for me
Very
and
much.
just in my life. And so, did that, went off to college and knew I wanted to work with kids, and so got plugged into elementary education because I didn't want to spend a ton of money on a children's ministry degree and then find out, man, I really don't want to be in the ministry. And now what am I supposed to do? So I was like, I know that I want to work with kids. And so I got my elementary education degree and came back and started serving in children's ministry as a as a quasi kids pastor for a season, a kids assistant, if you will. And then God just moved into the kids pastor role. And then about 2.5 years after I started in full-time ministry as a kids pastor, God called my wife and I, got married in that season, and God called my wife and I up to Portland for another kids pastor role.
Yes.
And then we served up there at the church in Portland for 8 years. And in that season, God took my perception, my viewpoint of church being siloed in, this is my ministry and that's the only thing that I think about. And God said, hey, I've got a bigger plan for you. I'm calling you to do something bigger, to lead at a higher level. And so over that season, God just promoted me. I went from kids pastor to families pastor, overseeing kids and youth ministry. And then our church went multi-site. And so I took over seeing kids and youth pastors on all of the campuses we had. At the largest point before COVID happened, we had 5 campuses running. And so I was overseeing 5 youth pastors, 5 kids directors, and then God moved me into adult leadership, and so I was leading family ministries and then leading our centralized campus as the campus pastor, and then let go of families and moved into small groups. So I was the central campus pastor and the small groups pastor for all the campuses, and then moved into the executive pastor of campuses, leading groups, and then all the pastors on all of our campuses. And it was just this and that was all in the span of 8 years. God just kept saying, hey, I'm preparing you for something bigger. Hold on.
Wow.
And in that season, it was, I wrestled with some stuff. I knew that God had called me to something bigger, and yet I had to learn how to be a follower. To lead, you can't lead if you can't follow. And so I was in this season of wrestling with just some stuff personally, and didn't always agree with decisions that my pastor was making. And so that was tough for me. And I started meeting with a counselor, met with him for 5 years, just often, every other week for 5 years, just processing through, okay, I'm struggling with this. I need some help. And it was so incredible to unpack some of the depth of stuff that from my past and just other layers of who God had wired me and how my past had created me to be what I am today. And so we did that, and I got to the spot I don't have to be the one making the decisions right now. God's given me an opportunity to learn with somebody's blessing and somebody's protection over me.
Wow.
And so it was just this foundational piece. Again, it was so much packed into 8 years that God was preparing me. And then, like I said, 2 years ago, my wife and I got a call to consider moving back to the Rogue Valley. I was born and raised here, and so we started praying. And the church that called Grace Point was they were going through a difficult season themselves, and so it was one of those challenges of like, hey, do we want to step into a church that's in a difficult season, or do we continue just to be comfortable in what we've got? We're doing well. The church is doing well. We've got a good job. And we just felt like, God's calling us to make a transition, to move forward. And so we stepped out in faith. And by faith, we've been here almost 2 years. And God's been gracious. And, man, it's been a 2 years full of learning. But it's been so much fun over the last 2 years, and the entirety of it. It's been 20. I started at 12. I'm 34. I've been 22 years doing ministry at some level. 12 of those have been in full-time ministry, and there's never a day that's the same. And it's challenging and fun and enjoyable and brings you to your knees, and yet the rewards that come from it are incredible. So there's a nutshell.
Yeah, I wanted them to have a nutshell. At the same time, you're having kids. You have how many kids?
I've got 2 kids now.
Yeah, 2 kids. So at the same time, you're doing all the ministry. Yeah. You're having kids. Like real life is happening.
Right.
You're married.
It was a whole that 8-year period where we moved away and we were in the Portland area. That 8-year period was, so much happened. Just, I shared the work stuff that happened, but my wife and I personally, before we had kids, there was a spot where we were struggling personally, and we had to go get some counseling because we were just not seeing eye to eye well, and just some of the stuff that God did in that season in us. And we got through this challenging season where we're going to counseling because we weren't communicating well, and we got through that season. We kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, we should probably have kids now. Sure, let's get through a challenging season, right? And then, go and add some more challenge to your life. And so we had our 2 kids in that season, and that was an incredible blessing. Our kids are now 7 and 5, and love them dearly. And yet, as any parent knows, kids they bring you so much joy, and yet they can bring you some anguish at times as well, and some frustration. And so family was growing, and we were learning. Seasons change as they're younger. The seasons change so much quicker because they're moving from infant to toddler to preschooler to school age, and it just goes like this. And it was just as soon as you get to that spot, you're like, I think I got this figured out. It's like, nope, we're starting a new season. You're like, shoot, what's going on? Like, Lord, I thought I had this now, and you're going to change it up on me now. And so it was it was a lot. It was a lot that was packed into that 8-year span of figuring that all out, and the Lord growing us and our marriage and our parenting and leadership, like just the learning to lead beyond just, kids volunteers, and now having to lead leaders in that sense. Like that was, went from leading volunteers to leading paid staff, and how that impacts other decisions within the church, and leading other guys who had been senior pastors who had come into they merged with our church at the time, and so leading those guys who were former number 1s, call it, and now they're not even the number 2 or 3 on the list. And how does that dynamic transpire? And man, to learn all that at like 30 years old was crazy. It was crazy.
Pastor Chris, who's part of the Wilderness Cry, who's pastor of FCM, he comes from the streets, right? Mm-hmm. He's a drug dealer and just hood, and I come from the Western country world, but just like, and not raised, in the ministry. And then you, like 12 years old, right? Little David, already in there fighting giants, and like, it's just so cool how God can take all these dynamics and bring guys to maybe the same place, but it's such a different way of getting there.
Yep.
I wanted everybody to know where you come from because, Grace Point has a new pastor, but without knowing you, there's a big, so. But I don't feel like there's a so. I met you and feel like there's a purpose, and, God has prepared you for this season.
Yeah.
And my heart for Grace Point and the church is to fill it up, right?
Right.
Fill it up. And I've told you, I think Grace Point at this moment in time with the large building, one of the largest, when you guys bought it, it was the largest piece of real estate on the market when you bought the Deliverance carpet. And I feel like Grace Point is called to be the top of the funnel right now. When I went to Applegate growing up, 5,000 some people at the time, and it was the top of the funnel. Right. Everybody was coming, and I feel like Mountain's doing great, but the funnel's full, like, you know. And I feel like there's a new opportunity, and you have a vision right now. You've launched your new vision. Yeah. What's that new vision?
Yeah, man, our new vision. So we launched it, a couple months back, and it's to see people connect to Christ and to see them connect to each other. And so it's a multi-fold process, but it's also getting into the community. Like one of our, I've been challenging our staff with as we're thinking through how do we make a difference in the community of, the question that I keep asking is our community going to feel it if our church were to cease to exist?
One of my big words right now is the church relevant? And that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like so relevant, they would feel it. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. No. And so that's the question, right? Is churches are great, and churches across the world do so many great things, but one of the things that we can miss at times is being involved. And there are a few churches here in the Valley that do such a great job of being in the community. They would be felt. But right now, where we're at in our church and in our situation is would our community feel, and our staff, and we kind of have come to this realization through prayer and processing of like, I don't know that our community would really feel it. Like there's still people like, Grace Point, huh? What is that? Where is that?
Yeah.
Which is great. That means that there's an opportunity for us to share with people where we're at, what we're about, and invite people into our doors. And yet at the same time, the flip of that is, man, we've got to do something. We've got to change our process to get people connected to each other. And once we can get people connected to each other, we can get them to experience Christ. Because, man, one of our values at the church is one moment in the presence of God can change a person forever. And that's the reality of it, right? We can do all the programming, all the great things as a church, but unless someone experiences Jesus, someone experiences his presence, all the programming stuff, it doesn't matter, right? They got to experience Jesus.
Come on.
And that's where life change happens. And so we're trying to find ways to get into the community, whether it's through partnering with the school, whether it's through doing some big community type events that draw people in, that we can get people and trying to do it without our name on it, right? Yeah. We don't want it to be about us. Like,
that's so good.
If they come to us, great. Like,
of course.
But
Grace Point's going to have some,
right. And if somebody asks, hey, where are you from?
Obviously.
Yeah. Well, we're from Grace Point. Great.
To fill up the kingdom.
But we just want the community to know that we're for them.
Yeah.
Right. That we're not here to be against them. Because that's what a lot in the culture of today's society today, right? People are all opposed to, well, Christians are this and they're judgmental and they're this and they're this and they don't like me and they don't accept me. It's not necessarily the case. We may disagree with the decisions that you make and the lifestyle that you live, but we still love you.
Yes.
The problem is there's a lot of Christians that don't show that love. And yet Jesus tells us in John, right, they'll know you're my disciples by the way that you love people, right? So as Christians, we mess this up so many times. And yet my heart for our church and for our people is to say, hey, we want to just love well. And then by the way that we love, then people will know, hey, where are you from? What's different about you?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this for me? Like, you're not even getting anything out of it. And that's our heart is we don't want to get, if people come, great. If they don't, great. We just want our community to know that we're for them. And so we're beginning to implement that stuff. One of the big things, I took 6 weeks with our church and took 6 weeks trying to teach our church the importance of inviting people to Jesus. When Jesus came to the world, he came to seek and save the lost. And Jesus says, he gives a parable about a shepherd and his 100 sheep. And one of those sheep is lost. And he leaves the 99. He leaves all of the saved people, basically, to go find the lost person. And so I've been talking with our church and challenging our church, hey, I love you guys. I care about you guys. But you've got to understand, if we just focus and cater to the 99, we are never going to grow the kingdom. We want to see a double kingdom impact through Grace Point.
Yeah.
And so that means we may have to do things that you're not completely in agreement with, or that you personally don't have a preference for. And yet we know that in order to reach people that we're not currently reaching, we may have to do some things that we're not currently doing. And that's challenging for people who've been Christians for a long time. And so I took these 6 weeks to challenge our church. Hey, we've got to be an inviting church. Like, part of reaching out to that one lost sheep, those people. We did a study in preparation for this vision, as we were doing this, we found that from our physical church location, there were 63% of people who don't believe that going to church was an important thing. 63% of people. So I look and there's some incredible churches here in the Rogue Valley.
Yeah.
And then I look at that statistic and I told our church, I said, that means there's 61% of people that we still have an opportunity to reach, to make a difference in their lives, to get them to experience Jesus. So we have to become an inviting church. Mm-hmm. And so I was challenging them, hey, yes, we're going to go out into the community, but also part of living on mission is being Christ-centered, being on mission for those people and inviting them to church. And most of the time that's through relationship. Relational evangelism is so important and so much easier than the cold calls, right? Cold calls work here and there, right. Sitting with your waiter at the lunch or something after church and inviting them. That's great. And that may work. But oftentimes it's that relational evangelism because you've got relationship. They know that you're for them, that you care about them, and you're not trying to sway them or persuade them or do anything weird about it. You just say, hey, man, you're going through a season right now. I feel like God could just share something with you. Why don't you just come to church? Yeah. Just try it out for a Sunday. Yeah. I'll sit with you. I'll hang out with you. And if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But would you just come give it a try? And so we've done some different things in our church to encourage our church to do that. We created some neat little invite cards and just little things to encourage people to invite somebody to church and hopefully help them change somebody's life.
Absolutely.
It's the kingdom of God is all about relationship, and we've got relationships all around us, and yet we recluse at times.
So met with you. I don't know if you still do, but you were reffing.
Yeah.
You were reffing with a basketball.
Yep.
So that's such a good example to me.
Yeah.
Of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's
you gotta be in the community. You gotta be doing community with community.
Right. No, I still do. We just started actually last 2 weekends. I've been officiating basketball. It's my first weekend off this month in officiating, and I did it for a multitude of reasons, right? Like I love the game of basketball. And so I just, an opportunity to be around it, set my own schedule, obviously can make a little extra money to help out with school and kid stuff and all that fun stuff. But the other reason I did it is there's a lot of people that aren't believers that are around the game of basketball.
Yeah.
And most of the guys that are in our association aren't necessarily believers. And what I've enjoyed, over the last year, getting to spend time with these guys, and they're a very communal group of people. And so they're doing stuff together during basketball season, and even off season, they're golfing together and hanging out and doing stuff. And one of the things that I've found has been enjoyable is they've given me a nickname, right? They like, I feel like I'm part of the club now because they found out. One of the guys, one of my favorite stories, I was sitting there, I was working with one of my partners. I hadn't worked with this guy before, and we were sitting at this game, or we were sitting at an after the day, after the evening, everybody went out to go just hang out and grab a bite to eat after a Friday night kind of thing. And so we're sitting there, and there's this one of these guys that's just berating Christianity, telling all this stuff and this and that, and these very stories that probably I would guarantee they won't come out of my mouth, right? He's telling all this stuff, and I'm just kind of sitting there back, not really just listening and engaging and being in conversation with these guys. And so he and I worked together about 2 weeks later, and he comes up to me and he goes, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Our commissioner, he never told me that you were a pastor. I'm so sorry for that." I was like, "Hey, I'm not casting any judgment." I said, "I'm just hanging out with you guys, and I'm going to maybe do things a little bit different, but I'm grateful to be able to be around you guys."
You do you.
And so it came up, and so that happened, and then a couple weeks later, they gave me a nickname, right? That's how you feel like. I feel like you're like invited into the club, is like you get the nickname, like brother. So they call me Father Josh now. Like they've given me this nickname. So I texted him a couple weeks ago because we were working together. I said, "Hey, we got a game, at this time," and he goes, "Sounds good, Father Josh." And I'm like, it's carried over. Like they started calling me at the end of the year Father Josh, or one of the guys calls me Rev, and I'm just like, hey, I'm in though. Like they're guys that don't know Jesus, and yet they've allowed me into their circle. Yeah. And I appreciate that because it gives me an opportunity that, like, if life happens for these guys, they're comfortable to come and talk and say, "Hey, Josh, Father Josh, would you pray for me?" Like
Is that what the church calls you? No.
Yeah. So and it's an opportunity for me to be in the community. Being around people who aren't believers, and just being an example by the way that I love.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not out there proselytizing and saying, "Hey, you got to be in church on Sunday morning." No. And hey, this is just how I live life. You live how you live life, and I know there's going to be an opportunity when I'm going to be able to invite you to church. But I'm just going to build that relational capital and know that I'm here. I'm going to love you well. I'm going to work with you well. And when the time comes, God's going to open that door to say, "Hey, why don't you come to church? I'm speaking on this week, and I think this would be good for you."
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for that opportunity for those things to come up. But it's an opportunity for me to be in the community and just be around unbelievers, because in the church we can get caught up in the aquarium.
That's right.
And being around others.
We can think, we'll just invite them. We'll invite them. Well, sometimes we got to go out to them.
Right.
Right. Okay. Like we did that when I was pastoring, and we had Hope Ranch. We're like, we'll invite people to the church. Well, now we can invite them to Hope Ranch. But then I started coaching the high school equestrian team, because now I'm going to go to the high school where the kids are at, and because they're not coming. Those kids weren't even coming to anything I was doing.
Right.
I had a gym, and I had a church, and I had this. None of them were coming to us.
Yeah.
So what does he say? Go into all the world and make disciples. As you go, make disciples.
As you're going, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we're over time. It's been great. I hope everybody enjoyed that time getting to know Josh. Again, pastor Grace Point Fellowship here in Medford. Come to the body of Christ, and just be praying for this guy and this church as I hope and pray that they become a top of a new funnel that God's going to fill up, not only that church, but out of it, fill up the churches.
Right.
And hopefully you guys get a flavor of who Josh is and know that God has not just brought somebody in, but raised a person up. And it's just amazing that you were here.
Yeah.
God takes you to a place and then grows you and then regrafted you on down here. So God bless you all. Thanks for joining us at Wilderness Cry. Grit and grace. God bless.